Hello everyone and welcome to Double Bits Workshop. So in today's video we will be doing the 1200-ish hours on the good old longer LK5. This printer has been an absolute workhorse and I have been loving just having this in my home, having the capabilities readily available. The only concerns you really have is just make sure your bed is level every once in a while. Very rarely actually do I level it. And then make sure that you have a plethora of filament at the ready. Necessarily, I wouldn't say you have to have the filament at the ready, but it definitely helps to just have that freedom to just grab a spool and have at it. So it's been fun and I've been enjoying the heck out of it. Alright, so let's cover a few things here right quick. Let me turn on the printer for you. Alright, let's turn the machine on right now. Quick. A little dusty there. Alright, so 50 about. Zoom in kind of focus here for you. So there you have it. The 1,213 hours and 45 minutes that I have put on this machine, me and my wife. Alrighty, so as you saw, this unit is over 1,200 hours of use on it. Now, I'm not going to say that every single print that has ever come off of this bed was spotless and amazing, but I will say that it has been a lot of user error and a lot of different things that are outside the environment that we did not really anticipate. Some of those things led to us purchasing the Comgrow filament dryer, which has been a wonderful addition. It has saved us a lot of hassle and a lot of issues. So this unit is still running for $370 on Amazon. The primary model you will see is the upgraded version, which the only difference between this version and the upgraded version is they have a steel housing that has two little funnels that come off of the main fan, similar to this one that I have printed, and those go for a same kind of larger fan. So on the original one it had a larger fan and a smaller fan, and you had to utilize this little print file that actually came on a thumb drive, or the rather little SD card here that came with the printer was this to be printed out. So this little print file hooked on the bottom, and it allowed air to go off of your main fan and blow around what you were printing so that it could cool it off. And then it had a real tiny little fan that actually ran over the hot end. So that was one of the things I ended up actually upgrading, as you have seen in other videos that I have on the channel. I went with two different fan covers. I've swapped the two around just for a little better airflow. This fan in the front here seemed to be accumulating dust a lot faster than the one on top that goes just onto what you're actually printing. These are all free files that I found on Thingiverse. If you look up just the longer LK5 as well as the LK4 or the Alpha Wise, those are all similar models. There was originally the Alpha Wise, then it became the LK4, and this is their newest model, which is the LK5. The same kind of style and build for everything on the LK4. This one is just a little bit larger and has a few improvements, as well as the display is turned from the Alpha Wise to the LK4 to kind of slightly over for the LK5. And those are the primary differences between the printers. Of course, build plate is the other big part of that as well. This is a glass bed, all the same stuff as you guys saw in the original unboxing and everything. So this is just kind of a recap of what you know up to this point. Now, other things I've had to replace on this printer have been just a couple of different nozzles. Most of the time it's a mild clog. If you use a blowtorch or something like that, you can kind of like clear them out if they do happen. Otherwise, I was using some really kind of super cheap PLA We all kind of test the waters to see what we can get away with, so that way we can save a buck. And I'm here to tell you, a few of those are not worth the $7 and $8 price tag. Yes, I have found some 1 kilogram spools that there's no reason to purchase it. It's $7 for a reason, and it comes from Shenzhen, China. That it's like the most moist, wet, horrid spot of China that just sent filament that was pretty much just wet from the get-go and just crumbly and breaking apart. Just don't buy it. It was on Amazon for like a hot buy for a hot second, and then I could never find it again, and is currently unavailable until forever. So don't buy that stuff. But those did clog some ends. I have a little handy dandy couple extras here, but some of these little guys got clogged. I actually re-put one in here just for the time being. All that to say, let's go over some of the little issues that I have come up with, or rather have come across. So on some of my prints, I was getting some bumps and some deformations in the print at random levels, it felt like, but it seemed to almost be somewhat consistent. So it was around certain corners and bends of prints, we were having just little bumps and dimples. So at first, I thought, absolutely, this is water. I told you, there's going to be moisture getting in. I keep this little guy right here to let me know what the ambient humidity is. So currently it's 51%, which is pretty high in the printing world. You usually want it in the upper 30s to less than that if you can get it. And I'm a little bit higher than I want to, so I'm still definitely happy I have that dry box. So before a print, or if I feel like I'm going to be doing a lot of printing, I'll crank that on and let it go for a few hours, if before the print or just right off the bat with the print. So that way I know by the time this actually gets off the build plate and starts doing what it needs to, I'm going to want to try to make sure that filament has had time to dry, so on and so forth. So we were having some of these issues with those bumps and such, and we were very concerned it was moisture. I bought the filament dryer box, and it worked, but it wasn't quite working the way we had hoped. I had analyzed it, looked at it, so the wife said, hey, you need to get in there and just tighten every screw. Something has to be loose, something has to be wrong. So I started going through from the bottom up, and lo and behold, when I got to the very top, the last thing, your guide screw on the top here has a bearing that slides over the actual guide screw itself, and then it has a little clamping device. So it's a little plate of steel with a hole in it, and another little plate that goes into that, and it holds a bearing in place, and then that just rests in the bearing. It's snug. You actually have to kind of press it in there. Well, at one point, those screws had gotten loose from the gantry, and the bearing itself had popped up, so it's still in place, thankfully, and it hadn't fallen, but the rod was actually just loose. So the reason you want to have that up there is, as this rises up and down on the guide screw is mounted on the bottom. There's nothing really mounting it on top, so it would just waver. As that would go up and down, you could actually see the guide screw go in and out. So as that's going in and out and moving, it was causing travel on the hot end, enough so, off of just that little bit of movement and a little bit of jarring, to cause bumps and divots randomly when it would try to move around at anywhere from 50 to 80 millimeters a second at that time. I have since kind of figured that this printer can actually get up to 100 millimeters a second, which I'm very impressed, and this thing cranks out things like no tomorrow, which is also why there's so many hours on this printer and so many different random projects, and we've gone through spools and spools and spools of filament, which has been awesome. But that was the first thing that was kind of a catastrophic issue to some extent that we ended up exhibiting major concern for, and we're like, oh god, we've done it. We did the 400 hours plus, and now we're starting to see some issues. Some ghosts are, kind of making themselves known, and lo and behold, no, some screws have gotten loose. So every few hundred hours, you could say, you want to go through and just kind of tighten up things that could be jiggling and jarring loose, because this little guy, when it starts zipping around on those motors, will eventually start to just kind of slowly jiggle a few things out. Now, granted, 1,200 plus hours on the machine, that happened roughly around just after the last video, so around 400-ish, maybe 500 hours is when we saw that happen. So that was one of the first concerns that we had, that we were able to take care of just by a little bit of elbow grease, a little bit of time, just kind of recheck all your P's and Q's, and then it was all good to go. Alright, so one of the other issues we started running into pretty much right after that one, we had one other little issue that started to make itself known. Now, with the same thing as vibrations, since like I said, I like to crank this thing up to 100 millimeters a second, so it is zipping, as well as I've tweaked my Kira as best as I can off of other YouTubers' suggestions, which has worked out phenomenally, to just absolutely let everything come out of that hot end as fast as possible to where everything is moving as quickly as I can. So I'm trying to hit that perfect point where I'm getting as much max speed as I can without any degradation of any of my clarity of the actual print that is happening in front of me. I want to make sure that I have as much clarity and detail as I can, but I want to hit that edge where I'm just about to lose a little clarity and maintaining as much speed as possible. Because we all love to have something in front of us, not only being built, but in our hands by the end of the night, rather than having to wait 3+ days for one print to know if we need to tweak something, need to change something. So we've kind of ironed out most of all of our settings through the printer and have gotten it to where we're able to kind of consistently do that. But that being said, with this running at 100 millimeters a second, some other things kind of started jarring loose on it. Namely, the first thing that started being major problem is the power cable. So it's just a standard 120 plug-in for computer or PSU of any kind, and it plugs in pretty firm to the PSU, but ever so slightly loose. So with the power cable jiggling loose, we were actually able to kind of test, if you will, the print resume function that's built into the printer. And it has actually worked out phenomenally well, because we're not always able to know exactly when the print stopped due to the power cord coming loose. So there's a couple of different little things that a few different other YouTubers have actually written and said will happen on occasion with power cables in general going to the PSU. Usually your PSU itself and the plug are not at fault. What will happen is that your cable on the inside of the teeth in here that actually clamp onto the prongs on the back of this, the male side versus this female side, will, on these, the copper will actually kind of expand over time. And what you can do is you can go through with a hook tool when it's unplugged. So take the cord by itself, make sure it's not plugged in the wall at all. You can then take a hook tool and kind of lightly bend those copper connections a little bit more tight so that this will actually slide on. That is your absolute free, super quick and easy DIY. Just make sure the plug is unplugged. Of course, got to make sure of that part so that way you're not sticking your hand in the outlet type deal. But you can do that. It's free. Just be gentle with it. Make sure you're just doing it lightly. Test the plug, see if it gets tighter or looser. You'll know if you're doing it right versus if you're doing it wrong pretty quickly. So that is one free method. Otherwise, I'll have to look on Thingiverse, and I believe Thangs or Yagi had some STL files for the back of the cord where it hooked around this and then had two extensions that went over the plug and actually utilized the two screws that you'll see in the back of your PSU for the plug. So on your plug, on the back of the PSU, this will plug into it and there will be two screws. You can remove those, and there was a file that hooked around and then screwed into that. I have yet to find it, so I'm mentioning it, but it's something I gotta look for. If anyone out there is able to find or have that file, let me know, and please let me know in the comments below, because that was a genius idea. For the time being, I'll probably use the hook tool method when it's unplugged and go from there, but that seems to be a nice, perfect long-term. It's just something that permanently mounts this cable into the PSU without having to worry about it coming undone in the near future. So that was the second main issue that has kind of presented itself, but a few different resolutions have been seen, so hopefully one of those will work out for us down the road. So one of the other things as far as a wear component we didn't really necessarily think about, but makes perfect sense, we have run thousands of feet of filament through this printer for sure, hands down. We've done probably a good 10, maybe 12 kilogram spools of filament through this. There's a stack of the little spools that I have in the corner, as well as we reuse some of them for some of the other filament that we've gotten, where it comes not on a spool, and it's also cheaper doing it this way. We have one Sunlu reusable, re-clickable version that just clicks over this, which is awesome. And I love Sunlu's filament, and Sunlu as a brand is also phenomenal. But on some of the other filaments that we've gotten that were given to us, we have re-spooled them onto prior use spools, which has worked out perfectly. And when you do end up with empty spools, there's all sorts of files for those. So keep that in mind. Different compartments and things that you can print, sides that all slide into it, and you just either use, some people cut wire from like an old coat hanger, other people use filament, some people use screws that you can actually mount those onto the actual filament roll, and then you can use those for storage. So little fun thing there for you. That's something that we might do down the road ourselves. If so, we'll kind of let you know on the channel as well, or you'll see it in the background. So to go back for a quick second onto the print resume function, here's actually one of those said prints. So this one actually failed 100% in regards to where it failed. I hit resume, I was all excited, and then the nozzle clogged on me, and it kept going thinking that it was feeding filament out to beat the day. Didn't do nothing. It actually just made a mess of filament up here, and what we found out was that from the cool down and heat up with the filament we were using, that was a notorious issue for it clogging one of the cheaper filaments. It still looks good, but a few of the issues were some of the supports didn't come off properly, and that clog, of course. If you do run into that, there's some really wonderful tutorials on print resume where if you have something print and then you end up losing your print resume function, don't have it, or in other instances like mine where it clogged the nozzle, so even though the function was great, that was kind of a downfall, sadly, of cheap filament. But you can measure the total height of what you have, or as soon as you notice it happening, hit stop on the print, take note of how much the height is on your actual print, and go from there. I was able to get this pretty close. I need to lightly sand this down to make it in to meet up properly. And also having it upside down doesn't really help. But as you can see, the mask can be complete. I just need to go through, do a little light sanding, because I actually made this a little bit bigger than I was supposed to. But you can go through Kira and a couple other, like Prusa also has the same options to where you can print just the top of the actual total print, and then you don't have to worry about trying to reprint the entire actual mask or item that you are painstakingly waiting on trying to finish out and looking at going, well, it's a lot of filament I just wasted. So that is one of the examples I like to show for how that feature works phenomenally, and also how you can kind of refix something that might have been slightly off. But let's take a look at some of these examples real quick for you. Alright, so hopefully focus works pretty good here for a second, but you can ever so lightly see that was supposed to be more of a perfect sphere on the top and that little bit of like a shiny spot on top of the sensor right here. So the filament constantly pushes this down. When your filament runs out, the switch pops up and engages. But what happened on here from that little shiny spot there is it rubbed smooth one side and made this more like a knife point on this side. It was thicker normally across this way, and now the filament can run on the side of it without fully depressing the switch, and it thinks that it's run out of filament randomly. So that was our other issue we ended up running into, is that this little filament runout sensor ended up actually kind of being finicky. But there was one benefit to that. When we purchased the printer brand new, there was a little Ziploc bag that it came with that gave extra caps. So if you decided to mount the screen somewhere else, or if you lose one of these caps, or in this instance, this one was printed by my friend to hold extra nozzles, you had a couple of extras, as well as there was a 3D printed part right here to help cable manage. That was one of the fixes that they produced from when they first launched the LK5. A few people reported that, hey, this cable drags, sometimes it catches up in the printer. When I'm actually printing something tall, that can actually get underway. we need to figure out how to fix that so it doesn't get underneath and cause a failure or end up cutting itself or burning a motor up. A variety of things you don't want to happen. So the company actually produced this 3D printed part that comes with the printer that holds that cable out of the way. It even comes with 2 zip ties that zip tie around it. The other awesome thing is that the company sends you a second filament runout sensor for this very purpose. So when this one becomes spotty or dies altogether, which they will eventually, this is a wear part, you got to think of, like I said, thousands of feet of filament constantly running over a plastic switch will constantly slowly cut off little bits of plastic. They both wear on each other, but this will be the piece that ends up dying rather than the filament, of course. So it still functions. It's spotty though, so that's why we ended up swapping over to the new one. But it was nice to have that readily available, and over 1,200 hours before that was even a thought, before that was even an issue or concern of any kind. And then it just all of a sudden started acting buggy is what it felt like. And at that point that we loaded in some new filament and started noticing that no matter what we did, the sensor just kept on constantly saying, hey, run out detected. We're like, what is going on? We were concerned at first that the filament that we had might either be too shiny or it might not have been the actual proper thickness that was required, so the sensor was just being overly sensitive. Well, sadly, no. The sensor was being perfectly fine and letting us know what it thought was an issue. So we swapped it out, and it's been good since then. Alright, so the other thing that I've kind of noticed after 1,200 hours is ambient temperature fluctuations are a major killer of a lot of prints. And this is something, if you do a little more research, you'll kind of get an idea about. I kind of had an idea, I thought, but the levity of it was not quite there. It was lost on me drastically. So with your 3D printer, you have seasons that are going to be phenomenal. The winter time, anytime that you have a more dry, more or less a lot less humid and a lot more just arid, you're going to have a lot better print. Because the more moisture that's just ambiently in the air, it's going to go right into your filament. So if you were to live in some place like Illinois, Florida, or just really wet North Carolina, any of those places, you're going to want to definitely, Georgia is another one, you're going to definitely want a filament dryer before you even start printing. Because just having that out in the open, it starts absorbing moisture. And you won't notice it, feel it, or anything until you start printing. You're going to start getting a lot of strings. I started seeing those even with my filament dryer because of how much humidity we've been having here in the Western Slope area. It's just been a lot more humid than normal. Like I said, we're at 51% humidity, which is kind of unheard of for this area. It's great for our crops and our land and everything around here, but it makes it a lot more tedious and a pain for this printer to do what it knows to do. So I've printed some larger apparatuses. This thing is phenomenal. It's a dice tower. Has that fun kind of iconic sound for the big one here. Just love that. And I even printed a smaller one. Also, very good sound. But let me show you real quick. So I am getting some of these bumblies again, but I can tell you that for sure this is due to moisture. I didn't actually run the filament dryer prior to this print, and this is kind of the cause of that. So with that filament having absorbed moisture, and I just transitioned it from my Ziploc bag with a incandescent packet to the printer and kind of left it for a little while and then printed this after a couple days without running that dryer, this is the end result. It still is a great print, don't get me wrong. I love this, and in this one instance, that kind of bumblies kind of can play up to the eye of just a medieval tower. You can kind of see those little bumblies in and throughout on the tower itself. That being said, on the larger one, with the dryer having been run, there are little to no, like right here is a couple, otherwise vast majority of a lot larger object. Like this thing is huge in the 3D printing world. This used 473 grams of filament. Give you an idea, 1,000 grams is one spool. So this used almost half a spool, And this is only at 15% infill. And the layer lines, that like finish on top there is phenomenal, super smooth. And this was running at 100 millimeters per second, as well as this was being run through a 0.4 nozzle, over extruding at 0.65 millimeters. So for more of the tech savvy, that's my settings essentially. And this printer is absolutely running awesome, especially when my filament is a bit more on lock. It definitely runs very smooth and very nicely, and a very smooth finish as well at the very end. Alright, so there's some ideas on temperature fluctuation. You can have all sorts of different things happen on that same note. Bed temperature. So my ambient temperature, with it being summer in my garage where this lives, has gone up to 80 degrees. Now, my fluctuation before that was I was normally around 69 to like 72 degrees ambient temperature in my garage. And that temperature fluctuation of 8 to 10 degrees has killed a lot of different prints adhering to my bed properly. So when your ambient temperature rises, you need to lower your build plate temperature for what this is at with its heater. I had gone up as high as 65 degrees Celsius, and I was running that on the bed. That is way too hot at 80 degrees. I need to go at 60 degrees and maybe even 55 degrees Celsius. On the machine in Cura, you can set that up very easily. So just one note to kind of give you an idea of what you need to do when you start having high temperature fluctuations. So beyond just those kind of little things that I've kind of picked up and learned, I will say the prints that I've been able to produce are absolutely phenomenal. Like these little dragons. The detail is phenomenal, and as you can see, I've printed quite a few of them. They kind of live in all sorts of different areas. This is a print test. So this is a little print test dragon, and he's awesome. He's hollow. There is nothing on the inside of him. He's got multiple bends, multiple things like these little horns on the back. He actually has a little keychain holder for the back of his head. Awesome print. That one I might include down below on good old, I believe that was Thingiverse. So wonderful one. Another one that I've also done was the little earring stand. I can't quite remember exactly where that one was at, so just a heads up, I might not have that file in particular, but it's an awesome little modular setup. I have been cutting out some leather for earrings and some other things, just some ideas for sailing, as well as I've also made a few more wallets as well. Those are some of the areas in my local area that I will be selling and just kind of having fun with. I bought my wife a Cricut, and of course I ended up having fun buying one or two little attachments to kind of test some of my own theories on if it would work good with leather, which it does phenomenal. So that's one of the things I'm going to kind of do as a side hustle, just for fun as well. I enjoy leather craft on the side, and I think that would be one of the additional many tools in the toolbox for me. As you may have kind of noticed, I have another 3D printer that was given to me by my mom. Long story on that one, but I've been playing around with that. It is a 2018 3D cube, and that one is fun but finicky and definitely has its little hiccups here and there, but it can also produce some pretty good prints, and it's just kind of touchy on the router right now on if it wants to connect or not to print anything. So that's my main hitch and giddy up with that. There's also a fun toy back here that I'll probably do some future content and videos on. It is another laser, if you can't tell, for those of you who do not immediately know what a K40 looks like, but that's what that guy is. So that will come in a new video. I have additional things that are going to be in the works and having fun with. We'll be going on vacation here in a little bit to Montana. So it'll be a little bit more of a lull again before the next video, but I already have all the content, everything lined up for that. So I'll be shooting, creating, and moving forward with that here in the coming weeks. So stay tuned, everyone. Sorry for the length in between each of the videos. It's the middle of summertime, so it's hard getting off work, going through good old, ever since COVID, having a hard time holding on to people at work, so it's kind of been strenuous. As well as just all sorts of different things going on, family, friends, all sorts of things. So thank you also very much for your continued patronage and all of that endeavor as well. So, apologies for the side note. Let's recap and finish on this one. So, would I purchase this printer yet again after the 1200 hour mark? Absolutely. 100% positively. The Ender 3 and a couple other printers definitely have their following, and they are wonderful printers. Great hands-on, full-on builder kits from the get-go. You're given a bag of screws and a whole bunch of components that are all pre-cut and ready to be assembled, and instructions and tutorials for days on it. They are wonderful printers, but if you want something that's 90% built, has an insane build volume, it's still a reputable brand. This isn't your absolute, half the characters aren't even in English type, 3D printer that's straight from overseas China to your doorstep and you can't even really read it, or half the firmware isn't going to really work with basic kind of American firmware systems, stuff like that. All the nightmares that we kind of worry about purchasing overseas brands. I have to say, this one is phenomenal. It doesn't have any of the hitches in the giddy up that you would expect from some of the other like eBay purchase 3D printers that you just kind of fly by night, don't really know if they actually work properly, so on and so forth. This is a great printer. And it's very easy to do some of the basic modifications as far as like I put on the little extender like you saw in the last video so I don't wear the port out in the back. If this wears out, it's a $5 part. I'll swap that out. I don't have to worry about soldering or doing anything with the main board. That's modification. That's an upgrade in my opinion. And little things that you can print off, like the little cover for dust. You can print out a whole different, there's like 6 different heads you can do for this one. I chose the 2 setup because then all I had to do was buy a 4-pack of these Winsun little fans here, and they did surprisingly well, like amazingly well, and everything's just run smooth from there. Changed out a few nozzles, still the same hot end, still the same build plate. I haven't done anything really major to that. I have had to swap out the Bowden tube. That was one of the other things. I can't remember if that was in the 400 hour or not, but I did have to swap out the Bowden tube on this. It eventually did over, however many hundreds of hours, if not 1,000 hours, that the hot end was consistently heating that PTFE. It ended up needing to get swapped out. But those kits are $7-8, I think is what I spent for 4 of those. And it came with all these little attachments, which are awesome. I don't know the current market value. They may have gone up a little bit, but still, $8 to $15 for most everything for the 3D printer, which is awesome. And I would say it's a solid investment, something everyone should really look at. If they're looking at a 3D printer, I'd say don't skip over this one. As much as a lot of people wanted to dog this model originally for its first launch, this has only gained ground and gotten better over the years. And it is, as a company rather, the company itself has gotten better over the years. So I'd say go for it. Pull the trigger. It's a great printer and you will not regret it. So thank you all so very much for watching the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you had any comments or any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Make sure and hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Thumbs down if you didn't, that's perfectly fine as well. If you are not yet, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out greatly. If you want notifications each and every time a video comes out, you can also get that by hitting the notification bell down below. So thank you all again so very much and have yourselves a wonderful evening.